Welcome back to Within Tolerance Podcast, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson, and this week I'm joined by Joe Barros of TDC Manufacturing. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, it's great to be on here. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, yeah, thanks for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time and getting to chat. I know we've talked a bunch over DMs on Instagram, but it's nice to kind of put a voice to the name and face and all that.
Yeah, it definitely is going to be nice. I mean, I've been listening for a while now, and I really like what you guys have been doing, getting a lot of information out of it, and I just hope to maybe help some other people who are listening that could use it, because I know I need as much help as I can get.
For sure. Well, so what does TDC do? And you've got a few sister, or I guess I should say brother companies.
I see what you did there.
But yeah, so what does TDC do?
So TDC started as Tom's Die Cutting, and they were doing gaskets for go-karts, and then they were also doing sprockets. And so what happened was this guy kind of was getting older, wanted to retire. He was actually working out of his garage up in Tehachapi, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere out here in Southern California. And my parents, for my dad's retirement, well, my parents always owned a company. They used to own an X-ray company where they would go through, process all the X-ray film. They would be working on the equipment and stuff. So my parents have always owned a business, and they decided in '99 when they sold that they wanted to start a kart shop. We were heavily into racing. My dad used to race, and so it was like, hey, this would be fun to do with the kids. So let's just do that. So we started the go-kart shop in '99, and then TDC was a customer, a good customer of my parents, where they did a lot of business together. And so when he wanted to sell it, they went and called my dad, and they're like, hey, we're wanting to retire, sell it, would you be interested? And, with my dad being the entrepreneur he is, decided, yes, he wanted to do that. And so basically we drove down there in a truck, we picked up all the equipment. So it was like a punch press, there was a roller press. There was some other random equipment that we've kind of gotten rid of over the years, as we've kind of narrowed down what TDC is. But yeah, so we did that, and then the sprockets were actually being made by a machine shop, I think out in Bakersfield, and they got into aerospace, and they came to my dad. Like this was like, I don't even think it was a year into us buying TDC that they're like, yeah, so we're not going to make your sprockets anymore.
Oh, wow.
So we're too busy with the aerospace stuff. We don't have time to run them. And so my dad's like, well, I can buy a machine, I could buy the programs from them, and then we can run them. So that's the way my dad's always been. He's like, okay, well, let's just go ahead and buy this equipment so that we can do it. And so he bought a mill and a lathe from Haas in 2007. And so he basically was running that. And so we started with the sprockets because we bought the fixtures, we bought the programs. So they're like, hey, put these tools in this spot, press go. Everything's been proofed out. So, they got us set up with that. And then, it's like, okay, we ran sprockets. Now what do we do? And so my dad would just take stuff, he just kind of come up with these harebrained ideas. And, again, being in the sport for as long as we have, he's been racing go-karts since like, I want to say early to mid 80s.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, he was doing it for a while. And so it's like, okay, well, I've always had a problem with this, so let's make this. And so he would make this little tool or something that would help, kind of like the community and stuff. And so we are kind of doing that. And then, there was some other stuff that was kind of harder to get. And so my dad's like, okay, we'll just copy these. So he went and copied them, and he would see everything he was sending out, everything he was making was sent out to, I think he had like 3 programmers that he was dealing with. And so, he would like, okay, here's this part. Can you guys, copy it and then, write a program for it? Or he'd like write this on a napkin. He's like, okay, it needs to fit this, this, and that. Come up with like a napkin drawing, and was like, can you guys program this? We're running on a Haas, VF2 and yada, yada, yada. And so that's how he was programming everything. And so, I was going to be a photographer at one point. I was going to be, I always liked the business stuff. So I took some business classes, but I kind of did a lot of different things after, after high school. I was working with electronics, building really complex wire looms and wire cables for military test equipment. And so one of our big customers would go to like competitions, and they'd be able to scan an entire aircraft's wire harness. And I think it was a day. I think it took a day for them to do that. And whereas before, I guess before their technology, it was like it would take them weeks to like scan and go through, and their technology would actually tell them within like, I think it was within like 6 inches of the wire, like where there was an issue, whether it be a short, a high resistance level, if it was like cut, and they could like, look at the schematic, pull the panel, fix the wire, put it back up, and then test it, be like, okay, we're good to go. And so we were building the cables that would go in between their system, their computer, into the plane. And so that's what I was doing. That's what I was going to do. But my boss was just, I had worked with him since I was like 16, and I think till I was about 18. No, it was longer than that. No, I was in my, I think it was like 22, 22, 23 kind of ish. And it just like, I just had to get out of there. He was too difficult to work with. I really liked doing what I was doing. I love building things. I've always worked with my hands, but it was too much. And then with my dad, I think we had gone, I was working with my dad part time, but I hadn't fell in love with the machining yet, because everything that we were doing in there was just like put the part in, tighten the vise, hit the button. Like, woo, that was fun. Okay, cool. We're gonna go tumble this part, And so it's like it never really grabbed me. I didn't really care. And even now, like I really struggle with production work because it's so monotonous, and I like creativity. I like coming up with parts, and I like programming, and so that's kind of like my thing. And we went down. There's a big show in Southern California. It's not Hostech because that's their open house. But I had met, I think, Al from Fusion 360 at one of the big conventions they had in LA.
Okay.
And
So like
and
West Tech or something?
yeah, that's what it is, West Tech. There it is. And so I, I think he saw me and he's like, hey, come take a look at this. This is Fusion 360, and this is, no, I think at the time it was no, Fusion 360 was there, but he was showing me HSM Works. So he was like, oh yeah, you just use this application in SolidWorks, and then you can run toolpaths. And I was like, wait, hold on. How much is this? Are you a student? I'm like, yeah, kind of doing classes here and there. And they're like, cool, well, it's free. I'm like, what's the catch? Because none of this stuff's free. You look at Mastercam, you look at SolidWorks, you look at all this stuff, it's not free. And so he's all, no, it's totally free if you're a student. It's free for, I think it's 3 years or something like that with their Autodesk package. And so I think that is the same time when I started doing machining classes at the local community college. After I think this was probably 8 years into my college career, just bouncing around community colleges doing different stuff.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I was talking to Al, and then I think who's the other guy there, CJ. I talked to CJ too, and they were showing me all this stuff, and I'm like, this looks really easy. And so I had already had played around with SolidWorks at this point, and so I'd done like a little bit of SolidWorks, but then what do you do with it after you have a part kind of designed? Like, I don't know. And so it was either like, send it out to get programmed or something else. So they were showing us the HSM Works. And I was like, okay, just add this in. I added it in, everything worked up. And then I'm like, it was literally like, I think it was a dish, and I still have it. And it holds pens in my toolbox at the mill. And it was like, it's just a simple dish, a rectangle with chamfered edges, and I ran the tool pass, and I brought it in the machine. I was like super scared, like I don't know what this is gonna do. I don't know if this is gonna post out correctly, and everything actually ran perfect. And I was like, okay, I love this. What can I design? And so yeah, after that point, I just kind of started creating parts, and then I'd quit my job with my other boss. Is like, all right, I'm gonna go help my dad out, and I'm gonna do programming, and I'm just gonna see where this goes. And so at that time, I was running. I think this was around 2011, 2012, and so I was running. I had a Honda Ruckus, and I don't know if you know anything about the Honda Ruckus, but it's like this weird.
I have had numerous friends with them over the years, and they've all done, the what is it? Engine swap was
Yep,
GY6 or something.
yep,
Engine swap.
yep. The
Yeah.
GY6, yeah. And so I think my first one I did the GY6, and then the second one I was like, nah, I need something with more power, and so I ended up doing the 250 Elite motor inside there, and That thing, I made a mount for that. I had done like handlebars, I'd done, pegs, and just kind of just keep designing this other stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, this is fun. Like, I want this. And then I design it, and I started a website and Instagram, and was, working on, all the like Facebook groups and stuff, and starting to sell. At that time I was running under JSB just because it was just, I'd finish up work at my dad, in the shop at like 4, and then from there I'd stay from 4 to 10 or later working on my stuff. So it worked out really well because I could, do both. And my dad didn't care. He's all, yeah, go do whatever you want to do. I was blessed to have parents that kind of just pushed me in whatever I wanted, whatever direction I wanted to go. They never really pushed me in one direction. They're just, whatever you want to do, go do it and go be good at it. And so, I just started doing that with the ruckus stuff. And then, my parents were kind of like, want to retire. I think they still had the cart shop. And so the way the market is now, before when they first started it was, everybody kind of worked on their own stuff. They came to the cart shop to get parts they needed, then they would go home. We do occasional repairs and engine rebuilds and stuff like that. But what happened was, it had shifted into more of like that racing team where they had to be at the track helping people out every weekend and all the local stuff. And they're like, my parents are like, this is our second retire. Like, we've already retired. Like, we don't need to be doing this. And so they ended up selling the cart shop and keeping the machine shop because that's what I was interested in. They actually offered, like, do you want the cart shop? And I'm like, no, I don't want to be dealing with the customers of the track. I want to be inside the shop making parts. And so, like, cool. All right, we'll do that. And so I met my wife in 2017, I think.
Okay.
And we ended up taking over the shop in 2018. We bought it out from my parents. And so at that time, we had a Haas mill and a Haas lathe. There was a plasma cutter that we got rid of because that's just never good to have CNC equipment in the same room as a plasma cutter.
Yeah. They don't play nice with dust. That's for
oh
sure.
my gosh, it was all over the place. It was driving me nuts. And my dad, it's funny because my dad had a tech in looking at the machines, and he bought the machines in 2007. This was 2012, I think, was when they were there. Maybe even closer to 2014. No, yeah, it had to be 2014 because it was a couple years before we took it over. And so a tech came and looked at him. He's all, these machines look brand new. Like, my dad never really ran the machines in like a production kind of way. He like babied them, I think he was still running a lot of like high speed steel end mills, and he's like, well, these end mills are $20 versus $60, and I'm like, okay, my mentality is like, oh, okay, that totally makes sense. And then as I start doing programming, and I'm like, I was watching a lot of like Titan videos, and I know a lot of people hate on him for what because of, I don't know, well, for whatever reason, but he does have a lot of good information out there, and he taught me a lot looking through his videos on pushing the equipment, but not beating on the equipment, if that makes sense.
Right.
So, I'm like,
Totally.
okay, cool, a carbide. And then I'm like running these things, and I'm like, I just took off 5 minutes off of this part. Like, what have I been doing?
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, carbide everything. So it's like we've been transitioning, like everything's carbide. There's no high speed steel unless it's like drill bits. But even our drill bits now, we're trying to push. Now that we have like through spindle coolant on some of the newer machines, it's like, all right, cool, through spindle carbide. Probing.
Oh,
Probing is amazing. Because the machines my dad got from Haas, they're like bare bones basic. Like he's got the programmable coolant nozzle and a chip auger, and I think those might be the only kind of the only add-ons that the mill has. Like, it's
right. Yeah, the only
75.
boxes checked.
Yeah, 7,500 RPM, no read ahead. Like, it's got the umbrella tool changer. It's basic. No probing, and I was probably doing like about 3 or 4 years in when I got a Heimer. And I was like, I thought that was like the best thing that's ever happened in the shop, was getting that Heimer. My dad's like, why'd you spend so much money on that thing? I'm like, look at this. Like, look what it does.
It's pretty
it's
amazing, too. Like, if you don't have probing and you get the Heimer, you're like, oh my goodness, this is such a quality of life improvement.
Oh, it's huge. It's massive. Like people don't think about these things. The last thing I did was, and I'm like, I'm slapping myself for taking so long, but getting proper torque wrenches for collets.
Oh yeah, yeah. We
And
did
I'm like,
that maybe 6 or 8 months ago, and it's like it's so nice. Like it you eventually get a feel for it, but like it's just really nice to not have to think about that. Like it's one less thing to think about.
yeah, exactly. And trying to get the proper torque out of that handle that they give you, that's only about what 10 inches long, if that.
Yeah.
It takes a lot to tighten them down, and then after you got them tightened down, you got to change out a tool, you got to loosen them up, and so you're like banging it trying to break it loose, and like it's just it's just not like now that you just do. I can lift it easily. My wife can do it, and so I can be like, hey, can you want to let's change out these tools here. You want to do that while I'm finishing up programming? She's like, no problem. Whereas before, she's like, yeah, I can't loosen these up. And it just makes it that much easier. So I'm
Totally.
learning a lot about like the quality of life with like things that have driven me crazy over the years. One of the new ones we've gotten is I'm like, okay, we run. I think when I was looking at, we run. I think it was 18 consistent tools with like our karting stuff. Half-inch end mill, roughing end mill, face mill, drills and taps. For all it's all metric stuff because all the racing stuff, in metric. So it's like, okay, we have our, is it M6, M8, M12.
Right. Totally.
Like all. So you need a drill and and so I'm like, I'm going through. I'm like, what do we need to do? Because like it's super embarrassing, and here I am, talking about this. But up until probably up until the brother, I never bought a tool holder. It has been like the 10 or 12 tool holders that my dad had from the Haas, and that's all I've ever used. So I'm like, I'm trying to calculate how much time I've spent changing out tools with only using 12 tool holders.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like it's insane. And
Well, and
so
like
like,
people don't realize that they're consumables too. Like, they think, oh, well, I spent $150 on this. This should last the life of the machine. And it's like, no, eventually you're going to want to replace it. Like
yeah.
collets, collet nuts,
Hmm.
everything. Like eventually, and you would think like a lot of us who have done track days or like your family does racing, like you would know that everything has an end of life. But
Yeah.
and for some reason, I know a lot of people, me included, when I got into machining, you're like, oh well, this is a nice hardened taper, and like it's got to be perfect forever. It'll be fine. And like then you come
Nope.
across your first damaged holder, and you're like, oh geez, okay,
Yep.
maybe they aren't so nice forever.
Yeah, exactly. Luckily we haven't had any like big crashes or anything. I've definitely crashed the machine here and there, but nothing that's been like detrimental. I need to knock on wood.
Totally. So you had mentioned the brother. What is, first of all, like what companies do you have under the TDC brand? And then so I was looking at your Instagram. You've got a few under the TDC brand, and then do you have top level manufacturing, or is that one of your companies?
That was I always come up with these weird ideas, and my wife calls me out on it all the time. She's like, "Yeah, that was a dumb idea, and I told you that." Yeah, okay, all right, you got me. No, so what was happening was I'm like, okay, so TDC doesn't stand for anything. People always ask, what is TDC? I'm like, okay, whatever you want it to be. It was Tom's die cutting. We're not doing that anymore. Well, we kind of are. We still cut gaskets with the die cuts and stuff, but that's about all the die cutting that we do. And so I'm like, I want something that says what we do. I want something that like, I was going through like some of the business books and everything. They're like, "Hey, when you're starting a company, make sure your name tells them exactly what you do." And I was like, okay, well, what can we do? All right, I was looking through. I think it was on like GoDaddy. I'm like, okay, what web things are available? And I'm like looking through these different things, machining this, machining that, and I'm like, okay, what about top level machining? And it's like, okay, there we are. We're the top level machinists in the area. And so I was like, cool. We'll run karting stuff under TDC. We'll run job shop work under top level machining. And I'm like, it'll be that simple and everything else. And it just got overly complicated. And with the karting stuff, we already have a brand. We already have a
Recognition.
reputation.
Yeah.
Like and people we get it all the time. Where people are like, oh my gosh, we should finally put your motor mount on there, and it's like it's so much nicer because with the way like a stock motor mount works on the go karts is whenever you have to change the gear ratio, which you're probably changing several times a day. Trying to be like, okay, we'll need one tooth less so we can get more top end, or one tooth more so we can get some more bottom end. We need to change, because you're changing the gear ratio. So to get the axle to spin at a different rate, or have more torque. And so it all depends, different tracks, different layouts, different days, you're going to run different sprockets. And the way they are is like when these frames, basically they just used to bolt straight to the frame. And so, with welding, nothing's straight. No matter if it's been jigged up or not, nothing's perfectly straight. And so what happens is every time you tighten the motor down, because the parallel bars that you're tightening it to aren't perfectly straight, even being off just a couple tenths, like it rocks the motor, and the chain will tighten up or loosen up. So you're trying to find like the perfect tension, and you're like, all right, I found it, and you tighten it down. You're like, okay, cool, it just moved. Like it's either too tight or it's too loose. So with our motor mounts, it's actually a two-piece. So it bolts to the frame, so that takes up that little movement, and then we bolt the there's a top plate that bolts onto the plate that's mounted on the frame, which will slide. And so you can slide, and then you put two bolts on underneath that will tighten it down. So it already has moved, and so you just slide it on the little slider, and you set your chain where you want to go, and you tighten it down, and it doesn't move. And it's like after you do that, it's like going back to the old way of doing it. It just you can't do it. You can't do it anymore. But that's what
Yeah,
we want to
no,
do with the karting stuff. It's like we want you to make your day a lot easier. And I still work at the track with drivers, and I'll still do like driver training and stuff. Excuse me. And so by doing that, I can kind of stay active in like what's new engine packages, new this, new that, and then come up with new ideas too. But it's like, let's see. I was working for this kid for probably a couple of years, and we were traveling all over the country. This kid was phenomenal racer. But we'd be at like a national event, and then the radiator bracket, which is literally, so you're spending probably at a national level race, you're probably going to spend about 8 grand, 8 to 10 grand, and that's not including like travel or anything else. That's like it's insane, but it's like you're spending this kind of money. And then like the radiator mount, like one of the things we have is a radiator mount, because when you buy an engine, it comes with a radiator. And what the mount is it's a piece of steel that's been crimped on the ends with a hole through it, and it holds this radiator on a frame that has no suspension, with a motor that doesn't have a counterbalance in it,
right.
so
So
it's
it just shakes
vibrating.
apart.
Yeah, and so we break these. We broke those. I don't even know how many mounts we broke, and then I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to build a billet one, and we never broke anything after that. We never broke the radiator mount after that, and so
Yeah,
we do
and
that.
for
That's a
eight
big.
grand a weekend or something, you can't afford a $10 part to ruin your whole weekend.
Yeah, exactly. But some people get it. A lot of our customers get it, especially after they see it and they experience it. They're like, okay, that makes sense. But so stuff like that is kind of like one of the ways that we come up with ideas. So, anyways, I don't know where we were with this, but I know this probably wasn't the conversation that we were headed towards. But anyway, so what was the original question? I'm
What
the
are
king of
the
tangents, by the way. Like I'm
wait,
the king of tangents.
so stepping back to the 30,000 foot view, what are the brands under TDC, and what do you
That's right.
guys do? Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so we were talking about the quality. Okay, so our quality of parts, like people understand, like okay, TDC, like nice parts, and so again, like we were doing the top level machining, and then it kind of took a little bit, but then it's like confusing trying to do like machining and job shop with like karting, and then it just it got it got really confusing for that layout. And so what we ended up doing was just kind of dropping the top level machining, and then transferring everything to TDC, and we just left it as TDC manufacturing instead of trying to have TDC count for something, just because we already do kind of have a name. It may not be in the job shop world, but we still have a name. And then I was just thinking, like, nobody really cares about your name.
Yeah, I
They
always
care
assumed it
about
was
your
like
product.
Top Dead Center manufacturing or something.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that's kind of what's one of the things we kind of went with for a little bit, because it's more of like it's more of like a car term, not so much in karting, especially like nowadays in karting. Everybody has their motor built by somebody. And, back in the day, they used to, my dad used to do his own honing in the garage building his motors. But now everybody's like, oh, okay, all right, when I finish the race, I'm going to take Johnny's motor off and I'm going to give it to the engine builder. I'm going to pick it up next week and it's going to be fresh, ready for the next race. And it's like, you can change the piston in probably 10 minutes and it'll cost you $100. But people don't want to do that. So, that's all right. All right. That's cool. I mean, even last time I raced, I was out there changing pistons. People are looking at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just changing the piston. Like it's old. I just did a top end rebuild. It cost me $100. And it like blows people's minds. You can do that? I'm like, yeah. Like it's not difficult. You just pop the little wrist pin out, push the pin, lift it up, put it back, put the new piston on it, and then you got to break it in. Easy peasy. But I come from a different generation of racing,
right,
in this market.
So then, what started you down tactical defense company route?
So during COVID, the racing stopped. Like all racing, any sort of outdoor activities, everything stopped. And what's kind of nice about being in the karting world is that even though it stopped, people were like, okay, we're just gonna buy some new parts. We're gonna get all fresh sprockets. We're gonna update this, that. It's kind of like they had nothing to do, so they're like, let's go spend some money. So we slowed down for sure, but it's not like we went dead. We got this random welding job, and we don't weld. Like people ask me like, hey, do you guys weld? And I'm like, I weld my own stuff because I can barely weld. I can keep metal together, but it looks like a bunch of seagulls were hanging out.
Right.
So I'm like, I refuse to weld on anybody else's stuff. So like even like in the ruckus stuff, when I was building ruckus stuff, I would weld onto my frame for the mount, and then we even made a mount for the 250 motor that has to have a pipe that welds across, little bracing, because I broke the frame when I tried not to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, hey, I bought your mount, can you weld it? And I'm like, no, like I'm not about to do that. Like I don't want the liability. I don't know how to weld. I literally weld for fun, and I'm not gonna, like, if the weld breaks and I hurt myself, that's my fault. But I'm not gonna take on anybody else's liabilities for that. Like, no.
Right. Oh yeah.
Or something happened and they say it's because you welded it. I'm like, it's not even by the weld. So I just no. But we got this random welding job, and so what I did was I hired my buddy who just got fresh out of welding school to do it. And what it was is there were these doors, like the barn doors that you see at like Sam's Club or Costco,
Mm-hmm.
and all the racks that they got from China were literally bolted together. These doors probably weighed about 200 pounds a piece.
Oh,
And there's
geez.
10 of them on a pallet lined up in this little like rack cage that's bolted together with like the thinnest metal I've ever seen. And so, of course, what happens when they come over in the boat? It rocks, they break. Cool. We got paid a lot of money to fix all these things, because if they weren't fixed, they can't bring them in. Like Costco and Sam's Club was rejecting them. So I'm like, all right, well, I don't want to do it, but here's my price. They said, okay. So I said, all right. So I brought my buddy in. He did all the welding, and that actually that helped us launch the gun stuff, because it's like, okay, this job's done that we don't do. What do we do now? We're like, okay, well, firearms, I mean, is insane right now. So we're like, I've always loved to shoot. I love guns. I've always wanted to make my own parts. Let's do it. So we went and we designed a muzzle brake, and then just because I could do that, I wanted to do hand guards, but you need to get a die. So while we were getting the die made for the extrusions, I was working on the muzzle brake, and then my wife did all the CAD stuff. So proud of her. She actually did the lower for the CAD for our lower.
Oh, really?
And so
That's awesome.
yeah. She's a smart cookie. I got lucky with that one. She's not as smart enough to say no to my proposal, but she's really smart. And it's funny because she'll be talking, like, a lot of times, unless it's like questions directed at me on like our Instagram pages, my wife's most of the time it's my wife responding, and people don't get that. They'll be like, "Hey, great talking with you, Joe," and I'm like, it wasn't me." Like, so I mean, I'm like, why don't you just put like Sid at the end, so people know? Because sometimes she'll get mad. She's like, "How come people automatically assume it's you?" And I'm like, I mean, I don't know, like, but I mean, unless I'm having like straight conversations, like I talk to you a lot, like that's me. But like some people ask like a random question like about a part, and it'll be my wife responding, because I'll be doing something else, But I don't know where that came from. But anyways, so we started doing the gun stuff, and we got our FFL, and we're just like, hey, like this is hot right now. Let's kind of ride this wave. And we had TDC, and I was sitting in bed. And I'm like, TDC, Tactical Defense Company.
There you
There we
go.
go. We got the name. We can keep the logo the same. We just changed the little words underneath. We kept the TDC with the flag, and we the only reason we did the second Instagram page for the gun stuff was so it can be separate from the job shop stuff because of how kind of polarizing everything is right now.
Oh, totally. Well, I'm like
And
with all the advertising stuff too. It can
yeah,
be a mess for sure.
yeah, and that's another thing is like, okay, we've built up kind of this reputation with our Instagram for our machining and the carding. I don't want to get shut down because of the gun stuff.
No, I think it
You know,
totally makes
is
sense.
yeah,
It's
and
the
so
right
it's like,
way to do things.
yeah, exactly. I posted a video on my personal Facebook page of us milling an 80. Like not even like milling out an 80 where it was usable. We were milling an 80% that we would sell. And somebody had like commented like, "Oh, well, I guess I'm gonna have to find a new motor mount guy." And I'm like, "Cool, like,
Okay, like yeah.
all right, cool. Like, I good to know, I guess." I've had
Wow.
issues with this guy before, but it was just funny. So I was like, okay, it's a good thing kind of things are separate. So I mean, I like that people can still follow us if they choose not to follow our gun stuff. That's cool, but they can still follow our other machining stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Well, and I mean, you guys are doing cool stuff. So you bought the, well, so let's back it up. You started out with these Hawses, and
mhm.
now you've got two brothers in addition. So walk me through why you bought the S700 and then the, is it an R450 or R650?
650.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
that's
a
right, because you got
650.
the 40 tool one.
Yeah, we had to get the 40 tool. So we bought the S700 2 years ago. What had happened was, so we were in 1,200 square feet with the punch presses, the two Hosses, and we brought in some other smaller equipment. We brought in a laser and some other stuff, and we're like, okay, we're getting a little cramped here. And then in the same building, one of the units opened up that had air conditioning, and I was like, yes, getting that one. We're getting cramped. We're getting busier. Let's move over there. And so we I called the landlord. I was like, hey, I want to move over there. He's all cool, and then he's all, do you want me to take any of the infrastructure out? And I'm like, no, that's why I want to stay there. It's got a drop ceiling. It's got two air conditioners. Like, it's really nice for machining because it's cleaner, it's cooler. It's yeah. The suite that we were in before had sun hitting it all day, and it was not insulated, and it had a swamp cooler.
Mm-hmm.
And Southern California, when it gets hot, it can get muggy, and when you have a swamp cooler, it doesn't do anything.
I know the feeling. We just, I mean, I talked about it, I think last week or the week before, but we just put an AC into our unit
It's so
because we
nice.
had a few days that were like 97, 98 degrees and like 70% humidity in the
Yeah,
shop.
yeah, because you guys get like monsoons this time of year, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, swamp coolers at the beginning of summer were great. Like it
Hmm.
was like, 70 degrees while it was 100 outside.
Yeah.
And then the second the monsoons hit, it was like, boom, set like 60% humidity. And then the shop adds another 10% with the machines. And it was like, nope, this is terrible.
Yep, yep, it is so bad. And then a swamp cooler in a machine shop with like metal tool holders and fixtures and everything else like that just doesn't work very well, especially when it's even more humid.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, air conditioning is just the way to go when it comes to CNC machining. But anyway, so we moved in October of 2018,
Okay.
and then I think
So that was
we
not too long after you took over the business then.
yeah. So basically, we took it over, but I've been working on it. It was always kind of my goal to take it over. So that's the way I looked at it. That's the way I worked it. And so I'm like, I'm working this to be able to take it over. And so I was a partner with my parents before we took it over in the business. And so yeah, I was like, okay, we got to move. into a bigger suite because we're getting too small where we're at. And it was literally like you would put a box down of like parts or stock or something, and you were blocking a walkway. Like there was literally nowhere else to put stuff. We were so cramped, and so we're now in twice the space, and I feel like we're getting to that same point again. But
Oh
I think
boy.
I'm like okay, we could probably fit one more brother in here if we need to before we would have to move.
Yeah, because those
Um,
ours are not small machines. I mean, they're small for a or for a pallet changer, but they're not small machines.
oh man, when I was talking to my rep, I was like, "So how big are they?" He's, "Oh, it's about the same footprint." I was all cool, and then it
Nope.
comes here, and I'm like, "This is not the same footprint. It's the same width. It's twice as deep." He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, I guess so. I'm like, come on, Frank.
Yeah. Well, because it's the whole y-axis is traveling,
Yeah, yeah,
or
exactly.
yeah. So I mean, you have to have all that depth. We've got an M series at work, and it's the same thing. Like it's a long machine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's awesome. We got it to fit, and the problem with our units is they're like, I think it's like I think we're 26 to 30 feet wide on the unit. And so, like, if you think about like the depth of the machine, it's got to be 3 feet off the wall. Like, you can't put the S700 in front of the R650, or else you'd have like 2 feet of room in between them
Hmm.
with the way they're like laid out, with the way. And so, I'm like, that's the one gripe with our shop is because we can't, because of how narrow it is. Rectangular versus like more square would give us more kind of room around the machines. So I think we have them staggered. Yeah, we have them staggered. We have like the Haas, and then on the other side we have the brother, the 700, and then on the other side of that is the R650, and then the lathe is like kind of you know a little bit long, like on the long way of the wall. But it was a lot of fun when we brought that R650 in, because we literally had to take the entire shop and bring it outside
Oh, I
to
bet.
bring the machine in and then bring everything back in.
Well, I was looking at the picture. It looks like it just barely fit through your door too.
Yeah, because there's a false wall there that we have. Normally, we have like the plastic blind things that John Saunders loves to walk through, and so I actually had to take the mount off of there so that we can get the extra 2 inches to get the machine underneath.
Oh
But yeah, I
boy.
mean, luckily the forklift guys that were doing that were just awesome. I mean, they squeezed it right through there, no problem. But yeah, that was a little trek. But anyways, going back, so the 700 we bought, and at the time it's like we were getting really busy, but I didn't know, like, everybody asks like, how do you know when it's time to buy a machine? Like, I still can't answer that, because I'm like, I just kind of did, and then we got more work to feed it,
Yeah,
like.
it's a tough decision because, like, I mean, very at least in my experience, it's not like you're either so overwhelmed with work that you're like, I don't know if I have time to even bring on another machine, or you
Mhm.
are just like, you're like, I can see all this work on the horizon, and I think I need another machine, and I need to, go for it. But like either way, it's still a hard decision.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, well, okay, let's get this machine. And I think I was looking at, oh, I was just messing around, and I was looking at like a VF2 SS, and I'm like, man, I really want the VF2 SS. They're so fast, like, and they're so nice, and it has the probing, and like VF2 is where to go. And then I was talking to John at High Tech Machining, because he's probably 10 minutes away from me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, dude, it's great. That dude, he is the nicest guy in this. Like, I mean, he is so nice. I'm like, hey, can I borrow this tool holder that I'm waiting on the one from Mari Tool to come in? And he's like, yeah, no problem. Come on by. I got three of them here. Take one. And so like I'll borrow tool holders and stuff, and then it's really nice being able to have him as like a resource. But when we're looking at the machines, he's like, why would you want to buy a Haas? Like, and he was like, he's like, look a little bit closer, and then look at what people are talking about him online. And so I'm like going through some like the machinist groups and everything else, and apparently Haas has made some changes since kind of I don't know what generation or how they go, but like being our 2007, I never had a problem with it. And so I'm like, okay, I'll buy another one. And I guess like they changed a lot of even just like the hardware they use, where it's like cheaper hardware. And then I guess there's a lot of people having issues right now with like the way covers and everything else. And so um, she's like, maybe not. And then John's like, you need to buy a brother. It's like, look at your parts you're doing. you need to buy a brother. He's
And he
like,
would
there's no
know.
reason. Yeah. And so he's like, come over here. He's like, come to my shop, take a look at them. And so I come over there, I'm looking at them, and I'm like watching them do like tool changes. And I've seen them before, but I was always in my head like, oh, a 30 taper can't make any good cuts. Like, you know, 'cause their 30 taper might be a little bit quicker, when it comes to like moving around the machine, but it won't be able to take a cut for anything. And I was wrong. I was really wrong. And so I was like super against like the 30 taper. And John's like, look at this material right here. And I guess he's cutting like I don't even know what it is, like some like nickel carbon, like super hard material. And he's like, I cut this stuff all day long with this little 30 taper machine, and it's dead nuts accurate. I'm like, okay, maybe there's something to this. And so, yeah, I was talking with Frank, our rep, and he was talking about all the pros and cons. He's a salesman, so he's going to sell me on it. But after like looking at some of the other machines, I'm like, okay, this makes the most sense. And it was definitely more expensive than the Haas was going to be. But it's just I wouldn't. Well, obviously, I wouldn't go to another machine because I got another one. The only time I'd get like another one is if I needed like I think down the road I'd like to get like some sort of like horizontal. But man, for what the Brother is and for what the parts that we make, like it doesn't make any sense to get anything else. It
Oh,
really
totally.
doesn't.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if your parts fit the work envelope, there's almost no better machine for the money.
Yeah, exactly. The money and the just the return on investment when it comes to time. It's like I was running when I first transferred over, not even transferred over. When I first started optimizing the parts for the Brother from the Haas, the Brother was faster running the part slow than it was the Haas's like top speed.
Right,
Does that make
right, right.
sense?
Yeah, like you could
Like
take the
setting up the
code
part,
directly
running.
in there, and
Yeah,
it'll be like a 30% increase or something like that.
yeah, and it's just like I'm running the machine slow so that I don't crash it, proofing out a part, and it still is faster than our Haas, which isn't saying much because the Haas is a 7,500 RPM spindle versus a 6K or sorry 16K. So there's a little bit in that, but I'm just like I was blown away by that. When I looked at the time, I'm like, huh, okay. And so I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Indy car that we do, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah. So
super
that
cool.
one in the Haas when I was trying to run it as fast as I can, opening up tolerances on on like the arcs and stuff. So you had like a little kind of these little like weird little flat spots on the tires as they're kind of going around because it's I'm just trying. I think we were running that at about 6 hours to do it in the Haas, and when we ran it in the Brother, we got it done in under 2 hours. It was an hour and
Jeez.
45 minutes. Yeah, and I'm like, man, I wish I had like 100 of these to do. Unfortunately, when we do those, I think we do like 6 of them at a time. But I mean,
Yeah, you
still,
guys
that's a
get to
lot
do
of
some
time.
really cool things too. Like you do the Indy cars, you've got all those really cool trophies you do as well. Like I love when those kind of jobs come across the table, and it seems like you guys have a good mix of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so luckily my brother, he owns a trophy shop. And so
Oh, okay.
yeah, so there's a lot of like back and forth. So we do all his machining stuff, and so he used to do when he bought it out of college. Again, somebody that knew us through the karting stuff was like, "Hey, I'm starting to have health issues. I want to sell this. Do you want to buy it?" And my dad's like, "Well, my brother's or my son is graduating in May. This was 2000." 2012, maybe somewhere in there. I don't know when he graduated, but let me talk to him and see. My brother's all sure, let's do that. And so he bought it. My brother bought it from the guy. And, it used to be like, little ladies coming in to get a little medallion engraved and then, little league trophies. And then he just like, he took off with it. Like just, I mean, he did. I would never think that like a trophy shop would be able to buy a house in Orange County. And he did it. It's like he's ended up buying two other shops. One of them had like Lowe's and Home Depot accounts, and another one was just like kind of down the street. And he's like, well, let me just buy them out. And then there's only one shop here, and it's like, but he's been doing a lot of custom stuff now. And so his buddy used to race Indy Lights, and so he got a contract with IndyCar to do the Watkins Glen Trophy. And so that's what you're seeing is we're machining the IndyCar for the actual IndyCar series at Watkins Glen. So if you look up, like, I think we did it the last 5 or 6 years. You can look back at all the winners, and it's like, oh yeah, like Colton Herta, who won last year, I believe, or I think Ray Hall had won it, a couple years ago. And it's like watching these people that I used to race with now in IndyCar holding up a trophy that I made. Like, it's pretty awesome. And my brother's still trying to get Formula One for when they go to Texas. I think it's
Oh, that'd
Texas.
be so cool. Yeah, Circuit of the Americas.
Yeah, we were probably 3 days away from getting that job in 2020, and then they're like, "We're just gonna go with the other guy." And it's like
Oh,
we had designs, we had layouts, we had all this stuff. And the craziest thing about that, though, is it had just as many rules as like the Indy car or the Formula One cars. He's all, because they had to be a certain height, they had to be a certain weight, they had to be a certain, like, it's like crazy. Like, the trophies are going to be going through tech while the cars are going through. It's like, it was pretty wild. He was laughing about that, but yeah, the IndyCar trophy, I think that one would not have passed for Formula One, because that thing weighed about, I think when it was done, it was about 20 pounds when it was done.
jeez.
Yeah, because it had like a wooden base below it, and then you had like the acrylic pieces, and then you had this car that, I think the car weighed 9 pounds when it was done, of the aluminum.
Yeah, I'm
But
looking at the picture of it right now on his Instagram. It's super cool how it all came out.
yeah. So he's doing that, and then we've been doing. He's been getting heavily into like some soccer awards. Like, that was his like pivot in COVID, was soccer, because like a lot of these other places, like their big soccer tournaments and organizations and stuff, were still kind of doing their thing. We're like, well, we're outside, we can social distance outside and still have our tournaments and stuff. So he kind of went after that, and it went really well. It went really well for him. He was able to go through, because I mean, with all the racing being shut down, we were heavily into racing. We did a lot of IMSA stuff. We did a bunch of stuff, and then like, that all got shut down. So he's like panicking. What do we do? It's like, well, he was going through just like seeing what was still open, and it was like soccer awards. So he started a soccer awards Instagram, and like just heavily went into marketing, and it's paid back big time. And so we actually just did 75. Do you see that? It looked like a little wave thing that we were doing on our fourth axis.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did 75 of those
Wow.
for soccer. And I'm like, what's soccer doing with this? It started out with 5.5 inch round aluminum.
Yeah, that's
And
not a cheap trophy by any
no,
means.
no, but apparently there's like, they were saying there's like a handful of like big tournaments around the world, and this was one of them. This was like the United States one. But
Wow.
yeah, I don't know much about soccer, but apparently it was a big deal. And I'm like, if they ordered 75 trophies that started out with aluminum, it better be a big deal.
Right. Yeah, I guess you love soccer now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, I mean, so we have that. We have some more like kind of cool stuff kind of in the works. He's been, he was going after like the big one. I don't think he actually made a lot of money on that one, but he wants kind of the little feeder series stuff for that, because I guess they look at that trophy as like, wow. And then it's like, well, here's the guy who did it. Like, let's get these going down in the smaller stuff. It might be like not that grand of a scale, but
Yeah,
he can
every
do a
little
lot
bit
of.
counts.
Yeah, exactly. So he's actually been doing pretty well with that, and it's awesome because we do these brackets for him. We do like thousands of these brackets, and it's literally like we take like L aluminum and we cut it an inch long and put two holes in it. I hate running them, but it's decent money, and there's a high quantity of it. So it's like, even stuff like that. Like, we do a lot of work together, which is really awesome. And he's in the same building, so yeah. Well, he's only here 2 days a week because he has his other shop in Orange County that he's at 3 days a week. But it still works out for us. But yeah,
Super
so
neat.
yeah. So anyways, that's part of the TDC stuff. We did the top level. I had JSB for a while, which was the ruckus stuff, which TDC had absorbed when I took it over, or when I came in as a partner. It was like, okay, well, TDC can now bring in the JSB stuff. So yeah, I get these harebrained ideas, and I'm like, I'll create an account for this and do all this stuff, and then it'll die off.
Yeah, it's easy though. I
Yeah,
totally understand.
yeah.
So, do you use the R series? Is it just for tactical defense, or is it for everything?
Yeah, just yeah. So we had bought that because when all the gun stuff was going crazy, we'd done a couple shows at like the local shooting range, and what happened was we met some connections, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we can't get lowers for the life of us. Our last order, we have a PO, an outstanding PO of 200. I got three of them last week. I got one of them the week before, and it's like, well, we could do these things, and we can get it to you. These are local shops. I'm like, we could get these to you, no problem. Like, and I'm sitting here scratching my head, looking at the workload, going like, okay, well, okay, we can get you 20 of them in 2 months, but I can't put them in the machine before that. And so
Yep.
we're like, okay, what do we do? And it's like that whole thing where it's like we can see the work, we don't necessarily have the work, but we can see it. We don't have the ability to grab it.
Yeah,
We
you're at the
can't.
point where you're like, how do I squeeze 28 hours out of a 24-hour day?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like we have all this other stuff. We have our job shop stuff. It's like, what do you do? You know, it's like I think our payment's like 3,800 for that R650 a month, and I'm like, that scares the crap out of me. Luckily, we've been fine with it, but it's like, man, what do you do? But it's like you can't not do it because then you won't grow,
Right.
and you won't be able to get those accounts that'll pay for it. And so, it's been really tough, wrestling with that. Me and my wife going back and forth, like, okay, we're both trying to play devil's advocate, like, okay, what if this happens? What if that happens? Um, Luckily, we got our hands on some of that COVID money. Government's just printing it out, just hey, whatever you want. So we applied for some of those stuff, and it's like, okay, we have this. So if it hits the fan and we lose all our stuff, we can at least make this payment. We can at least pay off this machine, or not pay it off, but we could pay this for a year or two
And be all right.
if we don't have any work.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, that's kind of what got us there. And so luckily we've been able to optimize stuff. We've actually been talking with some more shops now and getting some variants in line so that we can make other people's stuff for them, doing, private labeling. And so it's been working out really good. We're still not up and running like fully yet. I want to get uppers going, so I have to find a drill bit and a bore and all that fun stuff for doing uppers. But once we have that, we'll be able to hit the ground running. And my goal is to have, first of all, the R650. I don't know. Have you ever seen the table on that thing?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's horrible for job shop stuff
Oh
unless
yeah.
you have like a fixture plate because you
Any
can't.
pallet changing vertical in general is just not great. Like our
Yeah.
Kitamura was a pallet changing vertical, and like you just spend all the time. Well, not all the time, but you spend a lot of time changing pallets in and out, and
Hmm.
it's harder to prove out because you're not right there at the table, and yeah, it's a pain for sure.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, we're just gonna set this up to run lowers, and then we can change out jaws and go to uppers, and like that's all it's gonna do because we can't we can't do anything else. You can only fit one vise in there. Well, maybe more, but we have the 20-inch orange vise,
Hmm.
and I actually had to notch out some of the sheet metal to get it to fit right when it was loaded with the lower in it. So basically, two operations of the lower, and then we can mount the other one on the fourth. And so we've basically maximized that whole table, as best as we can. I mean, I could probably put maybe some smaller vices on there, some of like the single, like our fifth axis or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, so we're just like, okay, we're just gonna do uppers and lowers, and then talking to my rep, that dude is brilliant with some of his stuff because when we were doing our handguards, I think the longest one we have is 15 inches,
Hmm.
and we were doing that in the 700. Basically, what we had to do to start before we could put on the fourth axis, we had to mill out the hole to size where the barrel nut goes. And
Okay.
so I had the shortest tool holder with a tool in there, the shortest length, and it was like it's one of the stubby side lock end mill holders, which I don't like using for like finishing work, but that's all I could do because I think it had a 1/4 inch from like when we would put the I had to flip the vise up on a riser vertically to hold the extrusion,
Hmm.
and so we couldn't probe it. So we were like, we had to really be on like making sure everything's center and everything. And we had the shortest tool that had to still be like an inch and a half, and
Oh
so it
man.
literally cleared by a quarter inch. And I'm like, any more, and we wouldn't be able to get that tool into there to be able to do the work. And so now that we have my reps like, why don't you just put it on the fourth axis, have it come underneath, flip up, and there's 27 inches of clearance once you're inside. And I'm like, shoot, now we can do all sorts of stuff. Now we can do like longer hand guards where, I know we had some people asking about like 17-inch hand guards and stuff. And so now we can do that. And so I'm like blown away by what we can do with just this other machine and still have it in like the brother brand.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's super cool. I'm glad to hear that that's all working out. I definitely know. I know those fears and like the whole devil's advocate. Like when we first were looking at getting the S700, it was very much the same thing. It was like, we're both still part time. Like, what's the worst case scenario? And we were like, well, we're both working jobs. We could technically float or like split the payment in half
Hmm.
and float it between us two. It would suck, but like we could do it. And, you go through those whole steps of like trying to justify it to yourself and getting excited and then trying to like dissuade yourself from it and like getting disappointed in yourself. And it's tough. Like it's a really tough, like unless you just signed like a few $100,000 contract to take you through a couple of years. If you're doing
Yeah.
job shop work, or you're a lower volume product, it can be tough for sure.
Yeah. But even a lot of that stuff's not guaranteed.
Oh no.
Like if you listen to like Titan's testimony, he's like, yeah, we got all this work, we got these machines, and then everything stopped. Like that's my worst fear, especially right now because of how unstable everything's been.
Oh yeah.
Um, I feel like there's a lot of tension built up in the market right now, and so I'm like, let's just keep riding this thing out until something happens. But luckily, the karting community didn't get hit very, like, going back to like 2008. Like it got hit hard, especially out here. But like back east, it wasn't as bad. It seemed like back east, Midwest, I didn't like that housing market didn't nearly go as bad as it did like in California, where everything's overinflated as is, and so people were still racing, which was nice. So I'm hoping like at least if the market crashes, hopefully the karting still is a thing because that at least will keep lights on. If everything else stops.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a racing in general is usually a fairly affluent sport in
Hmm.
like so there's always people with money that want to go racing no matter what.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I mean that's always nice, but I know like 2008. I mean, you couldn't give away trucks, you couldn't give away dirt bikes, like you couldn't give any of that stuff away because nobody could afford that. But at least with like the karting stuff, again, like you were saying, like different clientele, different mentality, and so the people are still going to race.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I know. I met a guy one time who his company makes like secret doors. So like
Huh.
like hideaway doors behind bookcases and
Oh,
stuff.
okay, okay.
And he said that when the market crashed, their business went through the roof
Yeah,
because the second that all of that happened, people with money wanted to protect their money.
yeah.
And so he
Oh
was,
no, that's I could totally see that. That's smart.
yeah, it was crazy. So we had one question from Patreon. We kind of answered some of the parts of it already, but there's a
Hmm.
few that I think we could touch on. Ben from Fort Manufacturing, he had asked, "Are you doing job shop work as well as your karting and firearm products?" You kind of answered that, but are you still doing job shop work, or is it mostly dedicated karting and firearm now?
So we still doing job shop stuff. We're trying to look at quantities, because it's like trying to change over, build fixtures, do all this stuff. It's like it's really difficult to do. Like y- you know how it is. You can't charge them the time it takes to actually sit down, nuts to bolt program to run 12 parts. You know, program fixture run 12 parts. Like you're never going to get paid what you should for that kind of work. So we're trying to balance because I know like some of this work can turn into bigger work like some of our other job shop customers that we have started out that way, and then they grew, we grow, you know. So we're trying to find that balance. So we're not doing it, but we're not being proactive at trying to find it. Not at this moment as we're trying to get all the firearm stuff going. We still do have like our previous job shop stuff for where we actually went out and we were marketing and buying ads and stuff like that. Like we still have the customers that are from that we're still doing, but again, like I already have the fixtures for it. Some every now and then they throw some new stuff at us, but it's not a big deal because it's normally a pretty good quantity. But like I just had to turn down a job the other day. Like they're like, hey, I have 5 of these like brass piece things that I need, and it feels bad for me to say like we can't do it, but we just like we're so overloaded right now. It would take a couple months before we could put it in the machine because of all the other stuff we have going on, which is it's such a blessing right now because I know there's a lot of people out there that aren't working. But yeah, so we still are, and I don't plan on not doing it anytime soon because it is really good for filling in the gaps. But right now we don't have very many gaps.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're being smart and choosy where you need to be.
Yeah, and like I said, like it's tough because I'm always been like the guy that's like, oh yeah, dude, no problem. Like, go ahead and do that. Like, I will bend over backwards for people and be happy about it because I'm helping somebody out who needs this part made or who needs this done or who needs that done, and it drives my wife crazy. She's like, we don't have time for that. And I'm like, I know, but this and that. And I'm like, it's just a little bit, but then that little bit always turns into a lot of bit, and it's just like you know
Oh yeah,
I had to really like kind of throttle myself with things that we would say yes to.
that's good though. So another part of his question, and you already got into how you got started, but how do you find products to focus on making and selling?
So a lot of it is just kind of like I mean, for the karting stuff, I touched it a little bit, but a lot of it's like being at the track, being in my element, I should say, because again, I've raced I raced since I was 7 is when I started up until I was about 18. And then my parents were like, hey, you're 18, you got to pay for it. And I'm like, okay. I almost start working at the track. And so, I actually would dip in every now and then and race, here and there. But I mean, at one point I was doing like all the national level stuff all around the country. I was nationally ranked at one point. But so like being in my element, I'm able to like see things that need to be changed or that a lot of it's things that drive you crazy. I'm like, I never really understood that until I started doing this because everybody's like, oh yeah, if you want to, if you want to start a business, find a problem and fix it. And it's like, that never really registered until I started doing it. And I'm like, I always like the motor mount thing. I always hated changing sprockets because it was such a pain in the butt to try and tension it, and you're always like making this call like 5 minutes before you're supposed to go on track, and so now you're sitting here messing with this chain trying to get it right, and I'm like, okay, this motor mount style won't do that. Easy, an easy fix. And even just a couple days ago, we had somebody call and was like, oh my gosh, we put that on there, it's so much better. I don't know how we've gone all these years without it and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's what we're trying to do. Like that's what we love to hear because that's what we find our job to be. So, like the broken radiator mounts, we made a better mount and we sell a lot of them in the karting world.
Totally. Yeah. Is that where the Speedio manifold came from as well?
Yeah, that was kind of like, I saw the pause one and I'm like, cool, that's awesome. And then I got a quote for it and I'm like, oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't released the episode yet, but the one that I'm releasing actually tomorrow, Easton and I start talking about pause because I came across them in a Yamazin demo video.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a really cool, like a tool that's kind of like a spring-loaded center punch to seat parts if you're doing like automation.
Okay.
But somebody I know got it quoted out and it was like $2,500, and it's like, come on. And I know a coolant manifold's like thousands of dollars.
Yeah, I think it was like $1,400 or something like that, and I'm like, that's not $1,400 worth of stuff. Like,
yeah,
no way. And so I was like, okay, we can make ours, and then we'll put an air blast in it because it's like when you're doing, if you're doing like a mid probe, a mid operation probe, and there's chips in the way, you're gonna get thrown off. Like, there's no way unless you open up the door, blow them out, the chips could throw it off.
Oh, totally.
And so it's like, okay, let's do an air blast. So, or if you're touching off tools, just have it hit little air blast before it touches the pad, and then you don't have to worry about it. And so that's why I'm like, I want to put an air blast in there, and we're probably going to end up doing like another version because I noticed it gets, I guess with the David Villalobos, he got one, and I think he has a brother fourth, which is massive, and he said it was too close for comfort the way it kind of goes out. But I designed that one so that it can kind of wrap around more versus just like having all the coolant on one side of the tool. It can at least try and get a little bit more.
Right.
And so if you're not doing any fourth axis worth, or like I think my fourth axis, I have the whatever that yellow one is. I can
Niken?
never remember the name. Yeah, the Nickens. It's a lot smaller, so I don't really have any issues with it getting. It'll get close, but it's not going to hit it unless you get the tool really close down to the table. And so I think we're going to make one that's more friendly to like a bigger fourth axis. But again, is like the coolant system sucks on the Brother, and I've never liked it. Like at first, I was like, "Oh, this is cool. It's going to hit right on the part," and then I had two different heights of parts. And then
Mm-hmm.
you run into some big issues at that point. And so I'm going to be doing that. And I'm going to build one for the R650 as well. Because
Yeah, I
I
was
know,
wondering if you had one on your R6 because I know you've got the Brother fourth on your R650, right?
yeah, yeah. But like, so the way the coolant manifold is actually pretty high up on the spindle. So the R650, I won't be able to use those cool little jets that I use on the other one. I'm gonna have to probably use like a lock line, but at least it'll get it in different areas. But again, it's the same thing. Like this one had just two kind of like flow, like high flow, of the lock line, and I'm like, cool. Like, well, I'm running, you know, a long drill. When you're drilling like the bolt catch, you have like that long tool to get down there, and it's like, okay, that's not even come close to where the rougher's at, because I want a short rougher to be a little bit easier on the spindle. And so it's like trying to get those. It's like even now I have some Ys put in, and so I have a little bit, like, it works, but it's still not like as nice as I'd like it. But we're going to be designing one of those pretty soon.
Yeah,
Um,
it's surprising. Like it's the same pump, but I know on our M series at work, like the coolant seems so much weaker on the traveling head machines.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure why, but yeah. I'm still surprised at how much they still flow a lot of coolant. But it's just having those two nozzles standard is like, it just doesn't work. Like I don't know where they think that that's a good idea. But at least with the mentality of like the 700, okay, if they're going to hit the same spot, the same height. But like the R650, you only have two coolant nozzles, but it moves up and down. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like it's not more, it's more consistent, at least on the 700. So there's definitely going to be a little bit of a market there. But now I'm like, I was going to use ours on the R650, but I can't because of the, I guess, little shelf that's behind the spindle where the Z, not the Z, but like the head would, move back in Y. And then also when it does a tool change, because of the 40 tool has the arm would
Oh,
hit it.
right.
Yeah. And
Totally
so
forgot
this
about the
one,
arm.
yeah, so this one we're going to build in front of it. So instead of going behind the spindle, it'll go in front of the spindle. So it'll be clear of everything, and should be able to get some good, distance, different levels of coolant moving.
Nice. That'll be awesome.
Yeah. And then, of course, we'll have to throw the air blast in there for, to keep with our norm.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think the air blast is an awesome idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think entirely Crimson, I saw he had put one on there. And I was already in the process of like thinking of how to do the coolant system. I'm like, I need to put an air blast in there because it makes so much sense.
Yeah. Well, and the brothers are so easy to add stuff like that too that it makes
Yeah,
complete sense.
yeah, exactly, exactly. The brothers. There's such a good machine. It's funny. There's a guy. Yeah, I've talked to several people and talked them into brothers, and I keep bugging my rep. I'm like, hey, when am I getting a kickback?
Right.
What kind of discount am I getting on the next machine? I've sold four of them. What the heck?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan, obviously. So let's see. Ben also asked, what challenges have you had promoting and selling your products?
The biggest challenge I have is myself, because I'm not a salesperson. I'm like the guy that's like, it works, buy it.
Right. You're like, what
Like,
else do you need?
Yeah, what do you need me to do? And so it's like I'm not a salesperson. Like, you talk to a salesperson, they'll sell you ice, to an Eskimo, and it's like for me, like I can't do that. Like my mind doesn't think that way. So it's like that's my biggest problem or my biggest struggle is like how to sell our products, and that's one that I've always struggled with. And so to me in my head, I'm like, create a good machining account to show off your stuff and then let people kind of visually see it and see it working. So like our motor mount, I did like this video of how it like tightens, how when you tighten it, it doesn't move. And to me, it's like that's the easiest way because I'm a visual person. So I'm like, if I see it, I can get it. But like trying to explain that to somebody, that's where I don't know why I'm not a salesperson. And it just that's my biggest struggle. So for me, what we do is I just try to visually story tell through our social media and then just hope that people see it, understand it, and want it. And so to me, it's like, how do I relay that? And I've always been interested in photography. I've always been interested in videography. And so I'm like, okay, I'll get out the camera, throw some lights up, let's just show it work, and hopefully somebody can see it and understand it and see the benefit. But to sit there and talk with somebody and explain stuff, it's like I'm not good at that. Like I'm not good at selling stuff like that.
You guys have
So
great pictures though. Like you definitely know how to post on social media.
yeah, we definitely try, and we take, like I said, we just try to do like a higher, just try and like set Grimsmo, what is it? Full Grimsmo. Try and
Hmm.
full Grimsmo it. Just try and like set the bar even with like our photos and our videos of like that's the level that we're at. That's the level of quality that we offer, and we just try and keep all that stuff. And I'll like snap a picture with my phone, and the lighting's bad and everything else. I'm like, should I post it or should I wait? Like I get excited with stuff, and I'm like, so some of the pictures are just kind of like generic, whatever. But we really try to like bring out the camera and stop and actually like photograph or video it or something. And so it's tough to do that when you're busy though.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All the fun stuff is like you immediately dump it when you're busy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. And some of that stuff's really important. Like good photos is important. Like people definitely like even yeah, a cell phone snap. Well, actually, I can't. It's hard to say cell phone snap now because those cameras are really good now. But like there's definitely a difference. And so like even like our boxes for like the firearm stuff, like we got like fully printed boxes and we put foam in there, and it's like they're gonna take the box, take the parts out, they're gonna throw the box away. Probably, I don't know. Maybe they're gonna keep them because they are cool boxes. But it's like I want somebody to look at the box before they look at our part and go, "Wow, they're quality." So all the quality is on the same level, and so like it goes along with like our photos on our Instagram. Like I try to keep all the photo and the video, and sometimes I lax a little bit, but I try and stay with like maybe on the stories I'll get like something little quick, but not permanent. I guess you
Yeah,
show it off, but not like a fully like edited photo. So I try and do nice packaging, nice photos, just to kind of keep that level of quality along the whole aspect of like our website, our social media, our parts and stuff. So it's like going back to how we sell, it's like we just try and keep all our quality on the same level, and then we hope that people kind of see what we see in our products and in the care and everything we take with it.
yeah. I think you guys do a great job of that.
Thank you, we appreciate that.
And then his last part of his question was, what channels do you sell products through? Because you have a distributorship for the cart stuff, right?
Yeah, so we try to stay away from doing retail sales. It's just I kind of sound like a not so nice of a person, but I don't want to deal with customers. I want to deal with running the machine. I want to deal with making sure the parts are perfect. I want to deal with coming up with new parts. I don't want to talk on the phone for an hour like I love talking, and I get caught up in that. So I know that, and so I'm like, I need to stay away from that, or else because I have no problem talking with somebody for an hour, but the
Right.
problem is there's an hour of my day,
Yeah.
and that's right now an hour of a day is a lot because we're just so busy. So we're trying to let the cart shops handle all the how to stuff. If there's an issue, we'll send out whatever we need to clear up the issue. But when it comes to like kind of the day to day, like how things operate with our parts or how to install it or stuff like that, like we try and let the shops handle that kind of stuff. Like again, like I have no problem answering the phone and talking people through it, but it takes a lot out of the day sometimes. And so we like working with the cart shops because we'll get an email, hey, we need this and that. Cool, pack it, ship it, within a couple days, and we're onto something else. And so we do a lot of that, even with the gun stuff. Like I said, like we're not trying to do a lot of like retail sales. Like we're trying to go to gun shows and stuff now. We're actually going to be in Phoenix in 3 weeks. I think they're having one at the Ice House.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a gun show out there. So yeah, if you make it out there, you'll see us. And then I guess there's another big one that is at the fairgrounds. But anyways, so that's kind of really the only retail stuff we're doing, and that's more to get our name out there. And we've actually made a lot of connections with other local shops by going to these kind of things. And so by doing that, we're able to make other people's stuff or private label stuff or just get stuff into their shop. And so, even though we're at the gun shows, our priority is trying to get into a shop, trying to do wholesale stuff and just kind of going with volume because I know, retail's great and all, but volume's more steady. And especially if somebody else, like in our karting stuff, one of our customers is probably one of the biggest kart shops in the United States, and so they're ordering probably every 2 weeks, you know, and so they're constantly ordering stuff from us, and it's awesome because of the sheer volume that they do. And so that's kind of what we want to do, and especially in like the gun stuff is like we want to get into these big shops, not even big shops, some smaller shops, but like a lot of them. And so we're trying to target the local community who are having issues getting parts or want to work with more local people, because I know it seems like, especially right now, a lot of local people want to work with local people. They
Yeah.
want to keep all the business, and especially it's really nice because we had some guys drop off some material, pick up some material, and they're 20 minutes away.
Oh, that's
It's like,
fantastic.
yeah, and so we're working on a really good relationship with them right now. And so I don't know if I can name names because we're doing private label stuff, but yeah, I mean that's kind of what we're doing, and that's kind of our goal. I mean that's always kind of been who we are, because they'll even there's a lot of companies out there that they do a lot of retail sales and then they do wholesale stuff, and it's like that you're kind of competing with your customer at that point, especially when you have a sale going on that's cheaper than they're selling it for. Now they're buying from you, but they're buying from, it's just, I
Yeah.
just don't like,
Sounds like some muddy waters for sure.
yeah. And so like we have our website, we have our products, and nothing goes on sale.
Yeah.
Matter of
Well,
matter.
and like, I mean, I know that we both can commiserate over how production sucks, but it also
Mhm.
is like a super awesome printing money at that point. Everything's
Yeah,
dialed, everything's ready. You just load tools, you hit the button and walk away.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we actually we just hired another guy who
Congrats.
it's our first, it's our first full time guy, and he's not a machinist. He's like EMT, and he's like me. He's like, I like guns, and so I applied, and he's been absolutely amazing for not being a machinist. Just all, he kind of just looking over my shoulder as I'm like setting up, like, what are you doing there? And so I explain it to him, and then boom, he can do it. And it's like, oh, this is great. So now I can sit at the computer while he's running stuff, and I could be designing other stuff or answering emails or doing. It's like having an employee or somebody that can do kind of the other stuff is amazing. It's like I was afraid, because it's like, man, what if we can't afford them? Like, it's going to be taking money out of our pockets, but it's like it frees up so much more time to do stuff that you didn't have time to do before. And so it's like, I'm like, do we hire somebody else now? Like, you know?
Right.
But luckily with the amount of machines we have and the run times, especially with like the firearm run times, like I think our lowers are about 25 minutes right now. And so
Hmm.
it's like it's so easy to run a couple parts on one machine, switch this one over, hit the button for the R650 to tell it it's ready, and then go back, and then the R650 will change when it needs to. The machine is amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I had more production stuff to keep our Kitamura busy because
Hmm.
I love that about it where you can unload and load the operator station, hit the
Hmm.
button, walk away, and you're like it'll change when it's ready. It knows what it's doing. But yeah, it's super cool. I'm pumped to hear that you got an employee. Congrats on that.
Thank you. Yeah, we had a part-time guy during the pandemic, and like I said, I hired my buddy to do some welding at one point, but the part-time guy wanted to do real estate, and I said perfect because smart kid, but I could tell he wasn't really in it. He was
Yeah.
kind of there to pick up a job, and I'm like, that's okay, but we're so small. We need somebody who's in it, who wants to learn, who wants to grow. Because I mean, our goal is to grow. Like we're not here like okay, we're good. Let's just sit here. No, like no, we want to grow. We want to. I could see myself being like a ten employee company, and then we'll see what happens from there. But I know more employees is more headache.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I guess if as long as you have the right people there running the employees, then it's a little less of a headache. But
Yeah.
it still scares me with with everything. My parents had in their business they had I think 26 employees.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and they were getting paid every 2 weeks, but some months have 5 weeks.
Uh
And so
huh.
my mom's like telling like the horror stories of like cash flow with like those 5 week months or 2 3 pay period months, and it's like, man, I'm having like yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I can't sleep thinking of like, okay, how are we going to pay for this material, or are we going to have did I quote this job right, like are we going to make money on this job, are we going to lose money on this job, we broke 3 tools doing this thing, like is he going to keep doing it, it's like it,
Oh yeah. When
people
you're
don't
constantly
understand.
worried about like the catastrophic failures, you're like, what if I don't
Yeah.
know something gives out and like the whole machine breaks? Like it's
Hmm.
it's it's frightening for sure.
Yeah, and then when you bring an employee into that who doesn't treat your equipment like your own,
Mm-hmm.
that's even more so. But luckily our guy that we brought in has been awesome. He's been very cautious, been very careful. He broke a tool. He's like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm like, "Dude, like you're gonna break tools. That's okay. Like just try not to do it.
Yeah.
But it's gonna happen."
Yeah. Learn from your mistake. Move
Yeah,
on. Don't do it again.
yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And like the nice thing too about you guys moving towards the R series is like if he continues to improve, like he could run 2 or 3 R's, no
Oh
problem
yeah,
with 25-minute run cycles.
yeah.
So that's definitely a force multiplier there.
Oh yeah. So I try not to put other stuff in the R650, but we had this job that I had to finish, and it was doing like the last operation after anodizing, and it took longer to change out the part than it took to actually run the part.
Oh
And so it was almost like one for one. And we put them in the R650, and you're literally standing there the whole time, but there was like 600 of these pieces, and I'm like, I can't, like, no, like, here you go, stand here, do this, and he knocked them all out. And I mean, I'm like, man, it was, it's so nice having the machine run, especially even for those short run times. And when I mean short, I think it was like 45 seconds. I think
oh
was the runtime on
jeez.
it. But being in the R650, I mean, yeah, you're standing there working the whole time, but you don't, that job would have been twice as long.
Right.
So, we
Well,
just
it's
kind of
almost
knocked it
better
out.
to be like 100% busy than to have that like 45 seconds of downtime because it's like
Oh,
not
yeah.
long enough to sit down. It's not long
Mhm.
enough to do anything. It's just long enough to realize I've got 10 seconds left before I have to load that machine again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he said he said it went by pretty quick too. Like so I did a couple hundred of them, while he was like running something else, or I forget what it was, but I ran a couple boxes of them, and I was like, hey, it's really not that bad. It just kind of, as long as you have something to do, like you said, like you don't kind of think about how much time it actually takes. You just because you're always moving, you look up at the clock, you're like, oh shoot, all right, it's closing time, all right, but you were so busy, it wasn't boring.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that takes us on to shop news and new things. You got an employee. That's a new thing. Anything
Hmm.
else go on new in TDC?
So, like I said, we're trying to go back and forth on if we want to bring somebody else in and then, do sales stuff. We're going to be doing uppers soon, so that's going to be fun. But, I was talking with Cutting Edge, John's brother, David, and, because he's been doing some as well. So he's been giving me some tips and stuff. And it's like, okay, we originally wanted to get like a 9-inch drill bit. And I'm like, okay, well, you can't put a 9-inch drill bit when you only have 10-inch max tool length, so that's not going to work. And so we're trying to figure that out, and then we got to figure out like a boring tool, because I think I want to go like the boring route and not the reamer route.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as for new stuff, I don't think besides like the normal, like just trying to build more relationships in like the firearm world, I think we're pretty steady. There was something I was gonna bring up, because I was like, yeah, I know he's gonna ask for new stuff, but I don't remember what it was. But if any of the listeners want to know, you just follow us on Instagram and you'll see it, because we try to be active.
Yeah, I was gonna say you do a great job of updating everybody, fairly often. So
Hmm.
that's probably why there's not a whole bunch of new things.
Yeah, that definitely could be it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think our next machine that we're going to get is probably, I keep saying it's going to be a lathe, but then we end up not getting a lathe. We end up getting mills, because I think, yeah, we have 3 mills now and one lathe. And the lathe kind of sits though. It doesn't have live tool.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, like we can turn round parts and that's about it. But we don't do a lot of stuff. And so it's like, it's hard. Like that's one that's really tough to try and swallow, the idea of buying another lathe, because of the fact that we don't do a lot of lathe work. But then I'm also looking at some of the parts we do work. I'm like, we could do that on the lathe. We could do that on the lathe, like on a live tool lathe. We could do that on a live tool lathe. So I'm like, maybe. And then we have other people asking like, hey, like, we have this part. And I'm like, can't do that, but I
Yeah.
could do it on a live tool lathe. Are you going to be doing 10,000 of them?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. No. One. I in speaking with Easton a lot, like you
Hmm.
and people with live tooling lathes, like there are definitely a lot of limitations that I think us mill folk don't really realize until we start using it. Like the
Hmm.
turrets are significantly less rigid than a mill spindle,
Yeah.
and like are usually limited to 6,000 RPM or something like
Hmm.
that. So
Hey, I'm
it,
used to that. I was 7,500 with the Haas.
I guess that's true. Yeah,
And
yeah,
you can't run it at full speed. I think the most I ever run that is like 7,000.
yeah. A guy I run program for, I mentioned it on last week's episode, but I think he's got a 7,500 RPM spindle. He's got like a 94 or 95 VFO,
Okay.
and I programmed for him. And yeah, he's like, yeah, keep it at 6,500 or lower. And I'm like, oh, like this is
Watching
rough.
paint dry.
Yeah, exactly. And so but I definitely understand those pains for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of good though, because at our school, at the local school I went to, they had a VFO with a 7,500 RPM spindle. So I was very in tune with that machine. I talked to the teacher when we were looking for another employee. I was like, "Hey, do you have any like students that kind of stand out that aren't going to crash the machine?" Because we've definitely heard some very loud noises in there from very incapable people. A lot of people like think, there were some people that would like taking it as like an elective,
Hmm.
and like, oh yeah, I could totally just take this and it'll be easy. And then we had one dude crash like a 2-inch face mill into the vise, and just like, I mean, it was like the loudest thing that I've heard a machine make, and it was just like dude, like you can't do that. Like you
Oof.
got to pay attention. Like the machine's gonna go exactly where you tell it to,
Right. Oh yeah.
you know. But he didn't even proof the program out. He just hit the button. Like, you don't do that. Like
That's so rough. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like the teachers at the school I went to were very clear from day one and kept emphasizing, these are stupid machines. They will do
yeah,
exactly what you tell them to, including destroy themselves. So
yep.
try not to do that, please.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, because like when I was in school, I had already had a lot of experience with my dad, working in at TDC with my dad. That like the first day of school, when we went actually out into the lab, because I had talked to the teacher and I'd taken some of the other classes with him, and he's all right, cool. I'm going to take these 5 students over here, and you're going to take these 5 students over here, and you're going to be on 2 different machines, and you're going to show them how to set up and run. I'm like, oh, cool. All right, we're taking the same class, but I'm going to be the assistant teacher. Cool, I could do that. Like he had me helping out, which it actually worked out. Excuse me, it actually worked out really well because I mean, trying to put 10 people around one machine, everybody's looking over their shoulders, trying to like, I can't see what is he doing. So it actually helped out a lot. But it was just funny, like having me as like a student showing everybody like the first day of like how to set up and how to operate and and the just the setup system. And luckily Haas's are really easy when it comes to their menus and stuff, but yeah, that
No,
was
that's awesome though. Like you never learn anything better than when you're trying to teach it to somebody. So that must have been really
oh,
helpful.
that's yeah, especially too because like they always say like there's no stupid questions, just stupid people asking questions. First of all, I'm always that one that's asking questions, the stupid one. But like I've heard some questions, I'm like, what?
Yeah. Are you serious or are you messing with me right now?
Yeah. Well, and another thing, one of the hard things about it is like I get this stuff. I've always been like a very hands-on person, a very like mechanics and stuff like that. Like it just always makes sense to me. So like I don't even have to think about stuff, and like I can take something apart and put it back together, and it just like the mechanics make sense to me. And there's other people that it just goes right over their head, and it's really difficult to kind of explain my thought process to them
Oh yeah, for
when
sure.
it's like I don't even really understand. I guess it's like when they talk about like good coaches were bad players
Hmm.
because they had to learn and they had to physically take each step. Where I feel like in the mechanics world, I'm like the one that's like, oh yeah, this just makes sense. I'll do it, and I can't explain what I did if that makes sense. So I guess that's kind of a downside of having me teach. But luckily, none of the people that I showed crashed the machine, so I must have done something right because the
Yeah.
one who did was not in my group.
Well, that brings us to the last question I ask every guest, which is, what is your research this week? What have you been trying to figure out or looking up a whole bunch?
So I haven't started yet, but it's going to be boring heads and boring tools. I've never had to do like boring or not. Is it boring? Yeah, boring stuff because I got to bore the hole to size for the uppers. So I have to drill. I'm gonna have to be looking for a drill. Which, if anybody knows a drill that is under an inch, so I think 0.96 was what I was looking for, and it's got to be 5 times D. I'd like indexable with this is the kicker, 1 inch shank. Because everything
Oh,
that I found, yeah, it's the brother. They don't make any tool holders that are inch and a quarter.
right.
Everything is 1 inch, and even like the broaching tools that we got were inch and a quarter. I had to turn them down, which I probably feel like I'm going to have to do for this drill, which is just like the broaching tool doesn't spin, so I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
Just find zero and call it good. But a drill bit, man, ooh, trying to turn that down to fit perfectly inside of a welded holder
Right. A and B concentric
and be
still. And
concentric. Like it's just, I might have, I might send it out to get done, just so then I know it's, you know, we have a good lathe, but how good is it?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so, like, like I said, I was able to do the other ones and it was fine. And I'm sure I could do them no problem, but it's just, I'd rather get one that has it. So that's what I got to find. That's going to be the troublesome one. And then also been reading a lot, and I've been reading Traction. I know you guys do your little book, book reading and stuff, but I've been getting into there. My brother got me hooked on that one, which
Awesome.
is which is interesting because when I was listening to John and John talk on their podcast about the that book, I guess Saunders didn't really like it. Was it Saunders or one of them didn't really like the book, the Traction book? They liked what's the other one that you guys were reading? Um,
The E-Myth?
E-Myth, yeah. And so I have that one too. So I'm going to be going through both of those. But I've been reading Traction right now, and it's a little bit above our level, but I like it because it's like, okay, this is where we're going to be going to. Because they say that the Traction is like 10 employee company,
Right.
where I guess eMyth is more just kind of like you start. eMyth kind of is like, okay, you're just starting with an idea, or it could be like you've already been in business for 10 years and you have employees and now you're working on growing more.
Yeah.
But I've read
I
a little
found
bit.
that like the E-Myth was more the mentality. of like
Hmm.
owning a business and like getting in that headspace of like working on your business, not in your business and all that. Whereas like
Hmm.
traction provides a lot more concrete, like, here, do this worksheet and see where you're failing.
Okay, yeah, yeah. My brother's been doing that, and that's one of the books that really kind of helped him launch his company into where it is, because he was in a boat rowing with one paddle, at one point, and so now he's got everybody kind of rowing, and they've been, like I said, they've been growing really well. So it's like, okay, we need to do something like that too. And I've always been like, well, it's just been me and then it's me and my wife, and then you know we can't, it's like we know where we're going, but then you really don't,
Right.
like you write it on paper, and it's like, what? Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You write
write it
down
on
something
paper.
different and you're like, okay, guess we got
Yeah.
something to talk about.
Yeah, and so it's like after reading some of this stuff, I'm like, E-Myth, was it? Yeah, no, no, no. It was, what's the other one? There's another one I was reading, and that's the one where I always feel guilty because I think about it whenever I take on like these smaller jobs. I can see the cover; it's just a bunch of squiggle lines, but basically it's about like cutting out a lot of junk and focusing your work so that you aren't spinning in circles. You're headed in one direction. Like, this is where we're going to go. And so, like, when I take on these small little kind of jobs that don't really, I don't like doing them, and it's a small quantity and a small dollar, it's like, they're like, just don't even take those. Say no. Like, it's okay to say no.
Yeah.
And so I was
But it's
reading that, and
tough.
I'm
It's
like,
really tough.
yeah, I'll shoot it to you in a DM, because I'm sure it's going to hit me in about 5 or 10 minutes after we get off this thing, where it's like, oh yeah, yeah, that's the book. But it's
Yeah.
actually a really good one. It's a really good one. I read that one probably a couple years ago. Um, but yeah, it's all about just kind of like saying no, like when somebody asks you to do something. And it's funny because it's not necessarily like an entrepreneurial book, but it's like just kind of like, I guess you can apply it to like middle management as well. Because some of the people that are like, some of the, like, I guess, case studies about it, where they're like, oh yeah, you're a manager, and then your boss asks you to do this, just tell them no. Like, I don't know if that would work in some of these other companies, but it's basically just kind of like focusing your work so that you can really excel at that, versus running around doing a bunch of little stuff, not really getting anywhere. So I'm like, that kind of hits home, especially with some of this other jobs that come in. But yeah, I'll let you know what book it is. But it's a good one. It's
Yeah. I'll
definitely a
put
good
it
one.
in the show notes so
Okay.
somebody could check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Well,
After we
awesome.
dust it off.
Thank you, Joe, so much for coming on. Real quick before we wrap up, Patreon thank yous. Ben Kaplan from Beige Power. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon. Thanks to everyone for backing the Patreon. Helps, I was able to send Joe a mic so that we were able to talk and you guys can understand him. It's not, bad audio quality. And that's thanks to all the Patreon supporters. So thank you all so much. And again, thank you so much, Joe, for taking time. Like you said, I know that a couple hour ask is a big thing for another small business owner. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, like I said, I always love to talk, so I have no problem doing that. And especially something like this, like, it's really nice to kind of like turn the brain off a little bit, not worry about the work, and just kind of have fun and talk about it.
Totally. And real quick, where can people find you on Instagram, online? Plug yourself so that people can come say hi.
Okay, yeah. So our main Instagram is TDC MFG I believe. Sorry, TDC underscore MFG INC. So TDC Manufacturing Inc. And then our gun one is Tactical Defense Co. And that's going to be where all our firearm stuff is. But if you find the one, there's a little description box, and there'll be that one. And then we're also on Facebook. I think it's just Tactical Defense Co. as well. And then TDC Manufacturing. I think it's actually TDC Racing Components on Facebook. And then our websites is TDC under hyphen MFG.com. And the firearms page is Tactical Defense. Oh, TDC Tactical Defense.com.
Awesome. Well, guys, if you've heard anything that you want to buy, if you've got a brother and need a coolant manifold, head over there. And if not, head over to their Instagram and say hi.
Yeah, we would appreciate that. We love having you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a great night. And thanks everyone for listening.
You too.